The ice cubes clinked as I lifted the crystal tumbler, 20 years of marriage condensed into one amber liquid. Our penthouse overlooked the city, lights bleeding into the darkness like scattered diamonds. Behind me, through the glass doors, I heard her laugh. That specific laugh. The one she reserves for Crew, my business partner. My best man. The voice that followed wasn't hers, it was something colder, calculating. The dosage is small. Slow enough that it looks like a heart attack. He'll be dead in 6 hours. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. The tumbler felt heavier suddenly, like it was filled with lead instead of bourbon. My hand was steady, that's what surprised me most. I'd imagined rage, panic, desperation. Instead, there was only clarity. Crystalline and sharp. My name is Marcus. I built everything from nothing, the company, the reputation, the life she wanted. But none of that mattered in this moment. I set the glass down on the marble table and switched it with hers. When she emerged onto the balcony, she was radiant in that emerald dress I'd bought her last month. She kissed my neck, the way she used to, before the distance started. Before she learned to lie with her whole body. I wrapped my arm around her waist and pulled her close. "Happy anniversary, darling," I said. She smiled up at me, and I realized I'd been living with a stranger for months. Maybe longer. She reached for her glass first, muscle memory, habit. I watched her bring it to her lips. But I didn't stop her. That's when everything changed. She didn't die that night. The poison, whatever concoction Crew had sourced, worked differently than expected. By midnight, she was vomiting in the bathroom, her body convulsing as she expelled the toxin. I called the ambulance myself, played the concerned husband perfectly. The doctors found traces of an unknown substance in her bloodstream. They called it a miracle she survived. What they didn't know was that I'd researched everything. Every text message between her and Crew. Every late-night call. Every hotel receipt. I'd been watching for 6 months, collecting evidence like a man building a case against God himself. The poison was just confirmation of what I already knew. They decided to erase me from existence. She spent 3 days in the hospital, and I never left her side. Not once. I held her hand while she drifted in and out of consciousness, whispering apologies she thought were delirious rambling. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." But she meant every word. Crew visited on the second day. He walked into that hospital room with flowers and concern plastered across his face, and I watched her eyes light up in a way they hadn't for me in years. That's when I felt it, the real fury. Not the shock. Not the betrayal. The realization that I'd been so focused on building an empire that I'd forgotten to build a marriage. That was my flaw. My blindness. I'd given her everything except what she actually wanted. But now I knew exactly what to do. I excused myself and made 3 phone calls. The first call was to my lawyer. Not the corporate one, the other one. The one I kept for situations that required discretion and a certain moral flexibility. I told him to freeze every asset in our joint accounts. Not maliciously. Strategically. She'd need to explain the poisoning attempt to access anything, and neither of us wanted that conversation becoming public record. The second call was to our accountant. I instructed him to audit the last 5 years of our finances. Every transaction. Every wire transfer. Every dinner, hotel, flight. I wanted a paper trail that proved Crew and I had been building something together while my wife was building something with him. The irony wasn't lost on me. The third call was to a private investigator I'd used before. I wanted everything on Crew. Not just the affair. Everything. His debts. His habits. His vulnerabilities. Back in the hospital room, she was sleeping, her face pale against the white pillows. Machines beeped around her like some metallic death knell. I sat in that uncomfortable chair and realized something crucial. I didn't want her dead. I wanted her to live long enough to understand what she'd thrown away. I wanted her to watch everything crumble. That's the difference between revenge and justice. One destroys. The other teaches. By the time she was discharged, I'd already begun untangling the web. Crew had embezzled nearly $2 million from our company over 3 years. Small amounts. Calculated. Buried in expense reports and shell accounts. He'd been planning this longer than I thought. He'd been planning to take everything. Crew didn't know I knew. That was the advantage I held, invisibility. I moved through the office like a ghost, attending meetings, reviewing contracts, shaking hands. Nobody noticed the shift. Nobody saw me documenting every conversation, every decision, every moment he overstepped. 2 weeks after she came home from the hospital, I invited him to lunch. Just us. The restaurant was neutral territory, a steakhouse downtown where we'd celebrated our first major contract 10 years ago. He arrived confident, relaxed. He had no idea the ground beneath him was already collapsing. "You seem better," he said, cutting into his ribeye. "Sarah's recovery. It's been tough on you." I smiled. That was his tell, using her name casually, like he had the right. Like he was already rehearsing the role of concerned friend. "She's strong," I said. "Stronger than I gave her credit for." He nodded, and I watched him relax further. He thought he'd won. The poisoning had failed, but in his mind, he still had time. Still had options. He didn't understand that failure had already been written into his story. "Listen," he said, leaning forward. "I've been thinking about the company. We should discuss restructuring. Maybe bring in new investors. Fresh blood." Translation: he wanted to dilute my stake before the real theft began. "Actually," I said, setting down my fork with deliberate slowness, "I've been thinking about something too." He waited. "I know about the 2 million, I continued quietly. "I know about Sarah. I know about all of it." His face didn't change. That's what surprised me. No panic. No denial. Just a cold recognition that the game had shifted. "What are you going to do?" he asked. Part 5. I leaned back in my chair, studying him like he was a problem I'd already solved. "Nothing violent. Nothing dramatic. I'm going to let the system do what it does best." Crew's jaw tightened. He understood immediately. I wasn't threatening him with my fists. I was threatening him with truth. "The SEC has a tip line," I continued, my voice steady as stone. "Anonymous. Very effective. They love cases involving embezzlement, especially when the paperwork is this clean. And yours is immaculate, Crew. You were thorough. Almost professional." He set his knife down slowly. Around us, other diners laughed and clinked glasses, oblivious to the execution happening at table 7. "Sarah won't cooperate," he said. "She'll protect me." "Will she?" I leaned forward. "The woman who just tried to poison her husband with your help? The woman facing conspiracy charges if this goes public? She's already lawyering up. Her attorney called mine this morning. She's prepared to testify that you orchestrated everything. The affair was just cover for the financial scheme." It was a lie. But it was a lie built on enough truth that he couldn't risk testing it. His hands were shaking now. "You'd destroy her." "I'm not destroying anyone," I said. "You both made choices. I'm simply ensuring those choices have consequences." I stood up, leaving cash on the table. "The SEC investigation will begin Monday. The IRS audit will follow Tuesday. Your assets will be frozen by Wednesday. And by Thursday, you'll understand that some betrayals can't be undone with apologies." I walked out of that restaurant without looking back. Behind me, Crew sat alone with his cooling steak and the weight of a collapsing future. The collapse was beautiful in its precision. By Friday, federal agents arrived at Crew's apartment with warrants. By the following week, his name was in the financial news sections, not the front page, but close enough. Local executive faces embezzlement charges. His lawyer scrambled. His family abandoned him. His girlfriend, not Sarah, someone else, left within days. Sarah watched it all from our apartment, and something in her shifted. Not remorse exactly. Something colder. She realized she'd backed the wrong horse, and now she was tethered to a sinking ship. I requested a meeting with her in our study. No lawyers present. Just us. She sat across from me in that leather chair, her hands folded in her lap like a student waiting for punishment. The emerald dress was gone. Now she wore gray, appropriate for a funeral. "I'm filing for divorce," I said. "You'll receive the house and 10 million in settlement. That's more than generous given the circumstances." "Marcus. Let me finish." My voice was quiet, which made it more lethal. "You'll sign an NDA. You'll never speak about what happened. You'll disappear from my life completely." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Not tears of loss. Tears of relief. She'd expected worse. "Why are you letting me walk away?" she asked. I considered the question honestly. "Because destroying you would destroy me too. And I've already spent enough energy on this." I paused. "But understand something, I know who you are now. Completely. And I'll never forget it." She left that room understanding that some victories aren't measured in blood or screams. They're measured in silence. In the knowledge that someone saw you clearly and chose mercy anyway. 6 months later, Crew pleaded guilty to embezzlement. 18 months federal prison. His career was incinerated. The company restructured without him, stronger actually, because I'd purged the rot. Sarah moved to Portland with a new identity and a fresh start she didn't deserve but would never appreciate anyway. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt hollow. The penthouse felt enormous now. I'd sit on that same balcony where everything unraveled, staring at the city lights, and realize that winning a war against people you once loved doesn't feel like victory. It feels like amputation. My flaw, the blindness that let her slip away, that didn't disappear with the revenge. It stayed with me like a scar. A reminder that I'd built an empire while my marriage crumbled, and no amount of strategic destruction could rebuild what was broken. One night, my sister called. She'd heard rumors, pieced things together. She didn't congratulate me on my victory. Instead, she said something that landed harder than any verdict could. "You got even," she said. "But you're still alone." She was right. I'd dismantled Crew methodically, legally, perfectly. I'd protected myself from prosecution. I'd emerged financially intact and morally justified. The system had done exactly what I'd orchestrated it to do. But the man staring back at me in the mirror was someone I didn't recognize anymore. Not because I'd become ruthless. Because I'd always been ruthless. I just never had to see it clearly before. The revenge wasn't about justice. It was about control. About refusing to be the victim of someone else's narrative. And in winning that refusal, I'd sacrificed something I couldn't name. A year later, I received a letter. No return address. Sarah's handwriting, but different, steadier, like she'd rewritten it several times before sending it. "I don't expect forgiveness," it read. "I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that watching everything collapse wasn't a victory for me. It was a mirror. I saw what I'd become, someone willing to murder for money and comfort. That's the real poison, Marcus. Not what was in that drink. What was in me." She wrote about therapy. About rebuilding. About the person she was trying to become in Portland. She didn't ask me to respond. She just wanted me to know that my revenge had worked exactly as intended. It had destroyed her, but not the way I'd planned. It had destroyed her illusions about herself. I burned the letter. But I kept the ashes. That night, I made a decision. I sold the penthouse. I stepped back from day-to-day operations at the company and hired a CEO. Someone hungry, capable, someone who wouldn't let ambition blind them to everything else. I started volunteering at a legal aid clinic, helping people navigate divorce proceedings. Not out of penance. Out of recognition. I'd learned something brutal. You can win every strategic battle and still lose the war that matters. The war against your own capacity for cruelty. The war against becoming the villain in someone else's story while believing you're the hero in yours. Crew served his time. Sarah built a quiet life I'll never know. And I learned that revenge, executed perfectly, is just another way of losing yourself. The victory tastes like ashes because that's all it ever was. And some lessons, you only learn when it's too late to matter.